is probably trying to mislead you, because it is that simple. And we need to focus our attention in the days ahead to get this legislation passed and to finally take action in a way that's directed at job creation in a bipartisan way. Madam President, I would yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. The Senate today continuing work on a bill that would allow sanctions against China if the Treasury Department finds that China is manipulating its currency. More work on that legislation is expected tomorrow. A measure that funds the federal government through November 18th is heading to President Obama after the House passed it today with a vote of 352 to 66. The Associated Press writes that the vote gives lawmakers additional time for what's sure to be an onerous task, passing the 12 annual spending bills that lay out the day-to-day operating budgets for cabinet agencies and departments. We covered today Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke testifying before the Joint Economic Committee. Chairman Bernanke saying today, quote, "The economic recovery is close to faltering." He also said the biggest factor depressing consumer confidence is poor job growth. We'll have Chairman Bernanke in our overnight schedule on C-SPAN and also right now at cspan.org. As we continue to wait for a senator to speak, here's our look at our primetime schedule. Tonight at 8 o'clock Eastern, the Senate Homeland Security Committee is held a hearing today on Medicare Part D prescription drug abuse. The Associated Press writes that drug abusers are exploiting Medicare's prescription drug benefit to score large quantities of painkillers, and taxpayers have to foot most of the bill. The Government Accountability Office found about 170,000 Medicare recipients received prescriptions from multiple doctors for 14 frequently abused medications in 2008. And Medicare officials say they're limited in what they can do to stop the abuse. Again, that's here on C-SPAN 2 at 8 p.m. Eastern Time.
Ms. Ayotte.
My water, but
The senator from Ohio.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciated the presiding officer's comments earlier in support of the Currency Exchange Rate Oversight Act of 2011. The presiding officer and I, both Democrats, joined by 5 Republicans and 3 other Democrats, were the prime sponsors of the Currency Exchange Rate Oversight Act of 2011. It passed the motion to proceed. We have the rules in the Senate are sometimes a bit impenetrable, but the motion to proceed passed last night with 79 votes out of 98. So there's clear interest in this body debating one of the most important jobs bills that we've seen in front of us in our 5 years in the Senate, almost 5 years in the Senate. And I think that I've never seen a bill pass that was this. I've never not seen in my time here a jobs bill pass this overwhelmingly, this bipartisanly, that was this important for putting people back to work. And let me sort of expand on that. First of all, this Currency Exchange Rate Oversight Act of 2011 has broad support from business and labor. It creates jobs without spending taxpayer dollars. In fact, this legislation raises revenue and reduces our deficit. Clearly, because when people go back to work, people that are now on unemployment benefits, sometimes receiving food stamps, sometimes getting other subsidies, maybe trade adjustment assistance, which the presiding officer has been so involved in. Instead, people going back to work will be paying taxes and not be the beneficiaries of those. So it's a plus both ways in terms of reducing our government budget deficit. And most importantly, it responds to an enormous problem, an enormous economic threat brought on by the Chinese Communist Party government. Senator Schumer and Casey and Snowe and Stabenow and Session and Burr and Hagan and Collins and I have been working closely to bring this bill to the floor. I thank the Majority Leader, who usually sits at this desk, for bringing this bill to the floor to respond to, say it pure and simple, respond to China's protectionist trade policies. This isn't the U.S. being, turning inward and pointing fingers at other countries. This is a response to Chinese protectionism, to Chinese economic policies and trade policies that have been unfair, that when the Chinese have cheated, and that cost us American jobs. And we know when we lose, when a factory closes, we've had 50,000, Senator Sanders said earlier today, we've had 50,000 factories close in this country in the last decade or so. Not all because of China. I don't blame them nearly for all of that. But when a factory closes, we know what it does to a community, whether it's in Harrisburg, whether it's in Sharon, whether it's in Erie, whether it's in Cleveland or Akron or Canton. I'm encouraged by my colleagues on both sides of the aisle who support this bill and who see how China's protectionist trade policies have undermined businesses, have disadvantaged manufacturers, and ultimately, most importantly, cost American jobs. We all know the problem. For years, China subsidized its exports by adopting artificial, manipulated exchange rates not based on market forces. As a result, China's exports to the United States remain cheap. Our exports to China remain more expensive. In other words, because they cheat on their currency, a product made in Wuhan and sold in Lima or Dayton, Ohio, will be cheaper because they have subsidized their production by weakening their currency. At the same time, if a company in Lima or Dayton, Ohio, tries to sell into China, the cost of that item is 25% more because China has gamed the currency system. So by keeping the value of the renminbi, the RMB or the yuan, the words for the Chinese currency, by keeping the RMB artificially low, China, if I could say, incentivizes foreign corporations to shift production there because it reduces the price of investing in China and makes Chinese exports cheaper. This continued evaluation, I use the percentage 25%. Some economists say it may be as high as 40%, but clearly it's in that range. That they are cheating, they are gaming the system, 25 to 40%. And think about in Pennsylvania and Ohio, two states that have a lot in common. Think about a company. Think of two gas stations on opposite corners. One buys its oil 25 or 30 or 35 or 40% less expensively, pays a lower price than the competitor across the street. It's clear what's going to happen. The competitor that can't get the subsidy is going to go out of business pretty quickly. And that's what's caused. It's that phenomenon that's caused such serious harm to the U.S. economy and has cost American jobs. In 1993, the Chinese currency, the RMB, was valued at approximately 5.5 to 1 U.S. dollar. Then from 1995 to 2005, it was valued about 8.28 without change during that period. That can mean one of two things, a huge coincidence or blatant currency manipulation. Our trade deficit with China in 1993 was about $40 billion in that range. Today we run a deficit, not quite, almost, 8, 9, 10 times that, a $275 billion bilateral deficit, just our relationship with the Chinese. According to a recent Economic Policy Institute report, since China joined the WTO, the World Trade Organization, in 2001, 2 million jobs have been lost or displaced in the United States as a result of the U.S. trade deficit. 2.8 million jobs. That's hundreds of thousands in my state. It's tens of thousands in states as small as West Virginia. It's hundreds of thousands in states as large as Pennsylvania. Currency manipulation is not the only reason China enjoys an enormous trade surplus, but it's certainly a big part of the reason. So from 2005 to the middle of 2008, we started to fight back, and we're headed in the right direction, however slowly. The Senate overwhelmingly supported a measure offered by New York Democrat Senator Schumer and South Carolina Republican Senator Graham that would put tariffs on Chinese imports if the government did not let its currency appreciate. In other words, if they just to take away, all it did was it wiped clean the advantage that China had created by manipulating its currency. That bill passed the Senate, but it did not pass the House. It was never signed by the President. But what it did do is get China's attention. Beginning in 2005, China began to do a slight currency appreciation, which allowed for a few years of modest progress towards letting its currency appreciate. But then, in the summer of 2008, China abandoned its feigned interest in fairness. It once again fixed the value of the renminbi against the U.S. dollar. Then in June 2010, China vowed to allow its currency to float more freely against the dollar and other foreign currencies. The Peterson Institute for International Economics found that despite the intervention, appreciation, the RMB is even more undervalued today against the dollar than it was a year ago. That's the recent history of China's currency manipulation. So the Chinese, in other words, when they know people are watching, when they see the U.S. government with our very, very, very strong economy, even when we look weak internally and way too many people are unemployed, we're still obviously the major economic force on earth. When they see us doing something, they respond, they start to act a little better. It's just a little bit like a naughty kid that when the parents are watching, they're going to act a little better. And when the Chinese, we hope our kids don't break the law the way the Chinese do, international trade law, but when we watch them, they behave better. When we exert discipline on them, in other words, we're going to change this law the way you've gamed the system on currency, they begin to let the currency float and let it appreciate and do some better, more fair-minded things. New research by economists at MIT shows just how much damage China's trade and export policies have done to our labor market and to our communities. A report shows China imports actually have effects on jobs, but also increased use of federal programs like the Social Security Disability Insurance Program. Of course it does. When people get laid off, all kinds of things happen in their lives. They apply for food stamps. They may lose their home, causing, if they're foreclosed on, the value of homes in the neighborhood decline. The public schools don't have quite the support. They may lay off one. They may not be able to hire one teacher as a result of a handful of people losing their jobs in the community. All those things happen. So when the Chinese game the currency system and jobs are lost in Pittsburgh or in Dayton, then bad things happen in Pittsburgh and Dayton to those families, to those communities, to those states. What's been our response when our trading partners use any means necessary, low labor costs, direct subsidies, currency manipulation to compete? What's been our response? Well, it's been inaction. We haven't done very much. It's been adherence to the status quo, and we can no longer afford to do that. Some, like the presiding officer from Pennsylvania and others of us around here, have been beating this drum for a long time that these trade agreements aren't fair, that they aren't fair to the American worker and to American, particularly small manufacturers. Bigger manufacturers kind of take care of themselves, and they kind of do by moving production overseas. Small manufacturers usually can't do that, and we know what it does to our workers. Bad tax law, bad trade law, bad currency policy. This bill's a modest measure. It's not as sweeping as I would like to do, but it's a modest measure that gives our government the tools to fight back. With different parts authored by several of my colleagues, and this legislation kind of grew into, this bill came really from two other bills that we put together. The bill updates the process and tools the government would have at its disposal when it comes to countries who are currency manipulators, who are in some ways repeat currency manipulators. Senator Snowe from Maine, a Republican, and I, a Democrat, have worked on a part that would immediately designate unfair subsidies as an unfair trade practice. That means jobs for another number of industries: coated paper in southwest Ohio, tires in Findlay, Ohio, aluminum extrusion, tubular steel in northeast Ohio. It means more American manufacturers, from autos to clean energy, can petition the government against unfair subsidies from importing countries. That measure is combined with comprehensive measures to reform the structural deficiencies in our government's approach to combating currency. That part of the bill was spearheaded by Senators Schumer and Graham. It would improve oversight of currency exchange rates, and I would add Senator Stabenow was involved in that. It would improve oversight of currency exchange rates. It would ensure that the Treasury Department properly identifies countries that undervalue their currencies. Under the Omnibus Trade Act of 1988, the Treasury Department is required to formally identify countries that manipulate their currency for the purpose of gaining an unfair competitive trade advantage. In recent years, Treasury has found that certain countries' currencies were undervalued. It was pretty clear and pretty obvious when reputable economists from the Reagan administration, from the Carter administration, for years, reputable economists are saying that these currencies are undervalued 25%, 35%, some have said as high as 50%. It was pretty hard for the Treasury Department to say anything other than these countries' currencies were undervalued. However, based on the interpretation of the law's legal standard for a finding of manipulation, the finding of the word manipulation, Treasury has refused and continues to refuse to cite such countries as currency manipulators. Now, our legislation is bipartisan. As I said, 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats are the prime sponsors. It got 79 votes. 3 Democrats voted against moving the bill forward yesterday. 16 Republicans voted against, so it's got broad bipartisan support. But what's amazing is presidents of the United States in either party. President Bush was negligent in finding of manipulation. President Obama has been negligent in finding manipulation. I'll give some credit to President Obama in his move in some cases of actually doing real enforcement of trade rules and trade laws, and it's turned immediately into job growth in the Mahoning Valley, a new steel mill, in Findlay with tires, in southwest Ohio with paper. But the President and the Treasury Department have just neglected, I think, to do their duty, and that is interpreting saying that China has manipulated currency. The biennial release of this statutorily required report to Congress is almost a Washington charade. Last year, Secretary Geithner even announced he would delay the report's release. I care less about the exact timing of this report than I do about the administration's willingness to be open with Congress and the American people about what it's doing and why it's doing it. But here's why it's important. Some argue the Commerce Department already has the authority to treat currency manipulation as an export subsidy and apply countervailing duties. But the Commerce Department's tended to also kick these decisions down the road, duck the issue of currency manipulation when it investigates other subsidies. The bill puts an end to that bureaucratic end around. I told a story earlier today on the Senate floor. I'd like to repeat it briefly. A trade lawyer in Southwest, representing a Southwest Ohio paper company, told me that China did not even have a coated paper industry, the glossy paper that magazines are typically printed on. Didn't have that technology until a decade or so ago. When they started those companies in China, they buy their wood pulp in Brazil, they ship it to China, they mill it in China, they sell it back here. At the high cost of transporting something as heavy as paper and as bulky as paper for the price of paper ultimately. So it's a pretty expensive move to move it from Brazil to China to the United States. The cost of labor is only about 10% of the production of paper, yet China has found a way to underprice Ohio paper and underprice paper made in other parts of the country. It's pretty clear that that's in part because they get a 25, 30, 35, 40% basically add-on benefit for their price because of currency manipulation. That's why, in part, they'll be able to do that. They probably subsidize their water and their energy and their land and their capital also, that they can underprice us. That's why this is so serious. Ohio workers have lost jobs because China has gamed the currency system. That's all we should need to know here. American companies have folded, have gone out of business because China has cheated on its trade policy, not following the rule of law in the World Trade Organization. That should be enough to get 100 votes in this body. It got us 79 yesterday. That's progress. Our bill makes it clear that countervailing duties can be applied when imported goods benefit from currency manipulation as an export subsidy. The bill would establish new criteria to identify countries misaligning currency and trigger tougher consequences for those who engage in such unfair practices. We no longer can accept China and other countries, allow them to do whatever it takes to make their exports cheaper. We can no longer accept that China continues to mount a massive trade surplus with the U.S. We have trade rules in the books. It's time we enforce them. It's time the World Trade Organization enforce its rules. Now, critics claim this bill would ignite a trade war with China. Frankly, China declared a trade war at least a decade ago. If it's not a trade war, critics assert this bill is not compliant with our World Trade Organization obligations. I've listened to many multinational companies argue our bill will provoke retaliation by China. My question to these detractors is, how can China impose retaliation against something that is, in fact, WTO legal? But since reviving PNTR status and the benefits of WTO membership, China's taken money from American consumers and American investors and American inventors without fully opening its market to American business and workers. The results are record trade deficits. The results are millions of lost jobs. These arguments come from the same proponents of giving China PNTR membership, WTO membership, PNTR status, WTO membership. So because they predicted, they said, they promised in 2000 when this passed that China would adhere to a rules-based trading system. Well, they won't. They haven't been. People care about our exports to China, as do I. Remember, currency undervaluation makes our exports harder to sell also. And yes, they've grown to China. But while U.S. exports to China have increased, they've not come close to balancing imports from China. But imports from China have grown faster, in fact, about 3 times as many imports as we export to China. Look at our trade deficit with China versus the rest of the world. In 2000 China represented 26% of our trade deficit. Last year it was just over 70%. So in the space of 10 years, look how this has changed. That's sort of the whole story, too. Currency is a big factor that can't be denied. And while many multinational companies do not say it, I think it's clear that even the most ardent proponents of China PNTR are feeling a bit of buyer's remorse, finding themselves unable to do business in China because of China's aggressive protection of industry. Others, in criticizing the bill, will say there's nothing we can do to bring back the jobs we've lost. They're old jobs. Americans don't want to work at those places anymore anyway. That's a pretty naive view of American manufacturing. My state is number 3 in the country in manufacturing. Only California, 3 times our population, and Texas, twice our population, make more than we do. If we don't act, we're not just talking about jobs in textiles or steel or tires. Those are really important. We're talking about jobs in clean energy and semiconductors and auto supplies. A trade war, WTO compliance, retaliation, we welcome this debate. I want my colleagues to come to the floor. Some of the 19 that opposed moving this bill forward, when they say China will start, this will start a trade war, they talk about WTO compliance, they talk about retaliation. Well, the fact is, China's been playing that trade war for 10 years. The American people have been patient as administration after administration continues to talk but fails to act. Our patience is up as more U.S. businesses are undercut, more U.S. jobs are eliminated. The bill's about our economic competitiveness where everyone is competing in the market by the same set of rules. That's all we ask. I've been to maybe 150 manufacturing plants in my state in the last 3 or 4 years. I know American businesses can compete. I know American workers can compete. Just make the playing field level. S1619 will help us do that. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
For Michigan.
Mr. President, first let me commend the senator from Ohio for his leadership on this bill. This has been a long time in coming. There's a long battle that's being fought over Chinese unfair trade practices, and one of the most significant and damaging unfair trade practices, the manipulation of currency by the Chinese, and Senator Brown is taking the lead in getting this finally rectified, and I commend him for it. I notice our presiding officer, the senator from Pennsylvania, who's also been a real fighter in this area, trying to correct the unfairness that is allowed to exist when Chinese currency is manipulated. Senator Casey is, I believe, one of the, not only has been a leader in this fight, but is one of the original co-sponsors, and I'm proud also to be a co-sponsor of this bill. I've long supported the effort to take action against unfair currency manipulation by our trading practices. I think for at least the last 8 years we've had bills that have been introduced to address the issue of unfair currency manipulation by whatever country it takes. This is an unfair trade practice that contributes to large U.S. trade deficits and to job losses. Now, the reality is, Mr. President, that when American companies do business in the global marketplace, that they're not competing against companies overseas. They're competing against foreign governments that support those companies. And that's especially true when foreign governments like China and in the past Japan and other countries manipulate the value of their currency to keep its value artificially low. Currency manipulation makes China and their exports, particularly their exports, unfairly cheap and U.S. products more expensive in China, displacing U.S. production and U.S. jobs. This is nothing short, as Senator Brown has said, of a Chinese government subsidy. We should be fighting against it and hard. Trade creates new jobs when we export goods. Trade results in the loss of jobs when imports replace goods that were once produced here at home. And when trade deficits rise, we're losing jobs to imports. The reality is that we've been running massive, unsustainable trade deficits with China. Just the first 7 months of this year, just in the first 7 months, we had a trade deficit of more than $160 billion with China. Now, that's 4 times larger as our deficit with any other trading partner. And last year, we exported $92 billion of goods to China. We imported an astounding $365 billion from China. So their growing trade surplus, which has been illustrated by the charts that Senator Brown has been presenting to us, the growing trade surplus with the United States and the rest of the world has been fueled by massive currency manipulation, by subsidies and other unfair trade practices. The estimates are that the Chinese currency is undervalued by up to 40%, which makes U.S. goods that much more expensive for Chinese consumers and makes Chinese goods artificially cheap in the United States and around the world. And as a result, U.S. imports from China have increased and U.S. exports to China have been suppressed. Now, Senator Brown has gone through some of these numbers, and I'm going to repeat them because I think that it's important that every American focus on these numbers and the growth of this trade deficit with China. In 2001, our trade deficit with China was $84 billion. It grew to $278 billion in 2010, and according to an Economic Policy Institute study which was released in September, this deficit resulted in the loss or displacement of nearly 2.8 million U.S. jobs over that period. The report blamed part of our deficit with China on China's manipulation of its currency, and it's just simply long overdue that we enact legislation to end that unfair advantage, because the tools that we have to combat the problem have been so far unequal to the task. The International Monetary Fund has what are called Articles of Agreement. Those articles prohibit countries from manipulating their currency for the purpose of gaining unfair trade advantage, but the words are hollow because the IMF has no means to enforce that prohibition. Current laws, our current laws, give the administration, on paper, the power to act to combat currency manipulation, but those laws are easily bypassed and too easily ignored. The Republican and Democratic administrations both have failed to take action. The Treasury Department is required to issue a semi-annual report on international economic and exchange rate policies, in which it could conclude, as almost every independent observer concludes, that China is manipulating its currency. To date, the Treasury Department has never made such a finding since the 1988 Trade Act mandated their report. Now, instead, what the Treasury Department does is it hints, it suggests, it sometimes threatens, but it doesn't act. A couple examples. Bush administration in 2006. Their report said the following, quote, China needs to move quickly to introduce exchange rate flexibility at a far faster pace than it has done to date. Given our strong disappointment, this 5 years ago, our strong disappointment and the importance of China to the world economy, the Treasury Department will closely monitor China's progress in implementing its economic rebalancing strategy, and it will remain fully engaged at every opportunity with China, and will continue actively and frankly to press China to quicken the pace of renminbi flexibility. Now, that's 6 years ago. That's the Bush administration. Now, May 2011, now the Obama administration. Here's what the Obama administration's exchange rate report said. Treasury's view is that progress is insufficient and that more progress is needed. And the report said Treasury will continue to closely monitor. Hey, those are the same words that were used 5 years ago. Must be that they sort of took this on their computer and then moved it from 2006 to 2011. The Treasury is going to continue to monitor, according to the Obama Treasury, the pace of appreciation of the renminbi by China. It is a high priority for the Treasury. Really? That's good news. The trouble is that the facts don't support the statement. It's a high priority for the Treasury, working through the G20, the IMF, and through direct bilateral discussions to encourage policies that will produce greater exchange rate flexibility. Close quote. The failure of administration after administration to do more than closely monitor rather than to take action is why Congress must act to pass legislation to require action against foreign countries that are unfairly manipulating their currency. And so the bill before us, Senate Bill 1619, the Currency Exchange Rate Oversight Act, is a bipartisan bill, combines several earlier currency manipulation bills. It clarifies that U.S. countervailing duty laws can address currency undervaluation, giving American companies and manufacturers stronger tools to fight back against these unfair trade practices. It would replace the weak and flawed currency provisions in current law with a new framework based on objective criteria that will require Treasury to identify misaligned currencies and require action by the administration if countries fail to correct the misalignment. Under this bill, the administration would be required to take specific action if a country with a priority currency designation does not adopt policies to eliminate the misalignment within specified periods of time. For instance, if no policies are adopted, after 90 days, the legislation directs the administration to, among other things, prohibit federal procurement of goods and services from the designated country unless that country is a member of the WTO Government Procurement Agreement, of which China is not a member. After 360 days of failure to adopt appropriate policies, the USTR, the trade representative, is required to request dispute settlement in the World Trade Organization with the government responsible for the misaligned currency. Now, Congress is on record in support of fighting currency manipulation. In 2007, a majority of senators went on record supporting a currency manipulation bill that was brought up as an amendment to a State Department reauthorization bill. That bill would have imposed tariffs on Chinese imports to compensate for currency manipulation by China, but it was withdrawn by its sponsors in exchange for a promise to develop and vote on a WTO-compliant bill. Well, the pending bill is a WTO-compliant bill. Last Congress, the House of Representatives passed a bill, H.R. 2378, the Currency Reform for Fair Trade Act. Now, that narrower currency manipulation bill made it clear that the Department of Commerce was to fight the illegal subsidization of foreign currencies by using U.S. countervailing duty laws. Unfortunately, the Senate ran out of time at the end of the session, and we did not take up the bill. So the bill before us, S-1619, will allow us to deal with any country that is found to be manipulating its currency, not just China, which is at the moment the worst offender. And, Mr. President, I would ask that the balance of my statement be inserted in the record, which goes into the history of currency manipulation, where other countries, particularly China in the particularly Japan in the 1990s and early 2000s, manipulated their currency, and this was a major problem for our manufacturers and put them at an unfair competitive disadvantage vis-a-vis Japanese manufacturers. So, Mr. President, with both chambers now on record supporting currency manipulation legislation, there is no reason why we should not pass this legislation quickly and send it to the President for his signature. I hope that our colleagues will support this bipartisan legislation because it will finally, long overdue, years too late, address the very problematic and costly practice of our trade competitors who manipulate their currencies to create jobs in their countries at the expense of jobs here in the United States. I yield the floor, and again, I want to thank Senator Brown of Ohio for his great work on this bill, and I know he and the presiding officer, Senator Casey, and others, including my colleague from Michigan, have been working hard on this bill, and hopefully in the next couple of days it will come to a fruitful conclusion.
The senator from Ohio.
Thank you. I thank Senator Levin. There's no better team in any state in the country than Senator Levin and Senator Stabenow. With all the troubles they've had in that state with manufacturing, as my state does, they are always on the right side of these issues, always advocating for local companies, especially small companies that feed into the auto supply chain and for the workers in those companies. And I'm very appreciative of his leadership for so many years in all of this. Mr. President, I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
We've been hearing debate here in the Senate today on a bill that would allow sanctions against China if the Treasury Department were to find that China is manipulating its currency. In the Associated Press today, House Speaker John Boehner said that he dismissed a Senate bill saying that it was, quote, pretty dangerous for Congress to tell another country how to run its monetary policy. The article goes on to say that most economists say the Chinese currency is undervalued by about 30%, with some estimates of up to 40%, giving Chinese exports a significant advantage against American competitors.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, may I ask that the pending quorum call be lifted?
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to speak in support of the Currency Exchange Rate Oversight Reform Act of 2011. And I would note the presence on the floor of one of its principal sponsors, Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio, who I've been very pleased to work with on this legislation. I'm proud to be one of the original co-sponsors of this bill, an important piece of bipartisan legislation that will help protect American workers from the trade-distorting effects of currency manipulation. In particular, this legislation will allow us to fight back against policies that China has used to gain an unfair advantage over American manufacturers. Our American trade deficit with China rose from $83 billion in 2001, the year that China joined the World Trade Organization, to $273 billion in 2010. That trend is discouraging enough on its own, but it is more troubling to consider that the growing trade deficit ultimately represents goods that are no longer made in the United States of America by U.S. workers. In fact, the Economic Policy Institute estimates that the trade deficit with China has cost 2.8 million American jobs over the past decade, including nearly 12,000 jobs in my home state of Rhode Island. With so many families still struggling with unemployment in the wake of the recession, it is important that we examine just how we came to lose so many jobs to a single country and respond accordingly. Now, it would be one thing if the answer was that China's workers are just more talented, their products are of higher quality, that they've simply bested us in the open market. But that is not the case. The evidence suggests another explanation, that China is gaming the international system. First, China provides subsidies to critical industries, which likely violates World Trade Organization rules, and gives Chinese companies an unfair competitive advantage over American manufacturers. Second, by restricting exports of their raw materials, China drives up the cost of making products here in the United States. Third, by turning a blind eye to or even facilitating the rampant theft of American intellectual property, China benefits from what may be the largest illicit transfer of wealth in history. Finally, of course, China appears to be intentionally manipulating the value of its currency. Indeed, through controlled purchases of massive amounts of U.S. currency, the Chinese central bank has made the value of their currency, the yuan, artificially cheap relative to the U.S. dollar. Economists estimate that the yuan is currently undervalued by as much as 28% against our dollar. The depressed value makes it 28% cheaper to buy goods from China than from the U.S., and it makes U.S. goods correspondingly more expensive. It is essentially a subsidy for Chinese products and a tax on U.S. products. And this is much more than a problem of abstract economic theory. The consequences of currency manipulation are deeply felt in households in Rhode Island and across the country, in the presiding officer's home state of Pennsylvania, in the floor manager's home state of Ohio, all across the United States. It is felt by families who, for generations, have contributed to our growth as a nation by going to work every day and building things, from cars and boats to toys and electronics. These workers help define our American character. From the start of the Industrial Revolution at Slater Mill on the banks of Rhode Island's Blackstone River, through the first decade of the 21st century until today. But they have watched in recent years as job after job has been lost to China. This unfair competition needs to stop. The advantage that the undervalued currency gives to Chinese companies has put American manufacturers out of business and middle-class Americans out of work. The Wall Street Journal reported last week on a study that measured the impact of unbalanced trade with China on communities across the country. The research shows that areas with industries exposed to Chinese import competition have higher unemployment rates and lower wages, and that people in these areas are forced to rely more heavily on U.S. government safety net programs. That study ranked the greater Providence, Rhode Island area second among regions exposed to competition from China. This comes as no surprise to Rhode Islanders. Rhode Island was once a world leader in textiles and jewelry manufacturing, but these industries have been hit hard by a flood of cheap imports from China, greatly straining our state's economy. If we regained the nearly 12,000 jobs estimated to have been lost to China over the past decade, our unemployment rate in Rhode Island would drop by 2 full percentage points. As I travel around Rhode Island, I've heard time and time again from workers and business owners about the costs of Chinese currency manipulation. George Schuster is the CEO of the Cranston Print Works, a textile manufacturer that traces its roots in Rhode Island back to 1807. He told me, and I quote, "We know firsthand the impact that China's disruptive policies have had, as we've seen factory after factory close their doors around us. Addressing China's manipulation of its currency would be a good first step to bringing our trade policy to where it needs to be to help get American manufacturers moving in the right direction again." Leslie Tato is the CEO of the nonprofit Rhode Island Manufacturing Extension Service, and she came here to Washington to listen to President Obama's job speech. She has worked with a diverse set of manufacturers across the state to help them increase their efficiency and become more competitive. She told me this: U.S. manufacturers are resourceful, agile, and fully capable to meet national and international demand. Currency manipulation creates an uneven playing field that has cost the U.S. countless jobs and has dramatically increased our trade deficit. I equate it to telling a boxer to go into the ring with one hand tied behind his back and asking him to come out the victor. Manufacturers in this country aren't asking for special consideration here. They just want it to be fair. Mr. President, this is why I made addressing currency manipulation a central part of my Making It in Rhode Island manufacturing agenda, and why I was one of the original co-sponsors of the legislation that is before the Senate today. The Currency Exchange Rate Oversight Reform Act of 2011 will strengthen the tools that we have at our disposal to counter the actions of countries like China that choose to manipulate their currency rates. This legislation will first improve the oversight of exchange rates and allow us to identify currencies that are misaligned. And for countries found to manipulate their currency values or that fail to correct a misalignment, this law will trigger tough consequences. Our trade enforcement agencies will gain clear authority to eliminate the advantage created by currency manipulation by imposing tariffs on products imported from offending countries. This should send a clear message to China or any other currency manipulator that if they abuse the currency markets, they will not benefit. Mr. President, simply put, this legislation will help level the playing field for American companies. Economists have predicted that a fair market for our exports would reduce our annual trade deficit by between $1 and $200 billion. The resulting increase in production would add over $250 billion to our GDP and create up to 2.25 million American jobs. Are the Chinese squawking about this? Are the big multinational corporations who have no allegiance to any flag or nation squawking about this? Yes, of course they are. America has for too long been taken advantage of, allowing the wiles of others to erode our wealth. The winners at a rigged game will always object when the other party gets wise to the fact that the game is rigged and begins to do something about it. But if we are to solve the problem of China's currency manipulation and stand up for American companies, American manufacturers, and American workers, we should pass this legislation. I applaud my colleagues from both sides of the aisle for their work on this bill. I commend in particular Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio, who is here on the floor managing the bill right now. I thank the chair, and I yield the floor. I note the